I kissed my daughter on the cheek when she moved back in, and I told her it was the best thing that had happened to me since her mother's diagnosis. That was the second most expensive mistake of my life. The first was believing her when she said she only wanted to help. My name is Gordon, not the Gordon in whatever story you think you've heard before. I'm 73 years old. 31 years as a licensed electrician in Halifax, Nova Scotia, the kind of work where the margin for error is zero, and the paperwork is either right or it's a hazard, and there is no middle ground between those two things. I retired in 2018 with clean hands and a clear conscience and a savings account that had taken 4 decades to fill. I was not a wealthy man, I was a careful one. There is a difference, and for most of my adult life I believed that difference was enough to protect me. My wife Elaine was diagnosed with early-stage vascular dementia in the autumn of 2021. The neurologist at the QEII Health Sciences Center was a woman named Dr. Arsenault, and she had the particular skill of people who deliver impossible news for a living. The ability to keep her voice perfectly level while the floor opens up beneath you. I drove home on the Mackenzie Bridge with Elaine asleep in the passenger seat, her head tilted toward the glass, and I counted the lights on the water below us and told myself to keep driving. Just drive. Get her home first. The money, $318,000, every cent of it in a registered retirement income fund, was not for me. It never had been. It was the number I had built in my mind around Elaine's future, around the memory care home I had already visited twice without telling her, a place out past Bayers Lake with a garden that got afternoon sun and staff who still used people's first names. It was the wall I had spent 30 years building between the woman I loved and the worst version of what was coming for her. Our daughter Nadia was 38 when her mother got the diagnosis. She lived in Toronto, worked in marketing, had a life out there that she'd built far from the salt air and the slow pace of Halifax. She called me 3 days after the appointment. Not a text, a call. And her voice on the phone that afternoon was the voice I remembered from when she was 12 years old and had decided something without asking permission, and was simply informing me of it now. "Dad," she said, "I'm coming home. Don't argue with me. I want you to understand something about me before we go any further. I am not a man who accepts help easily. My own father treated asking for help the way other men treated debt. Something you avoided if you had any self-respect. That got sealed into me at a young age and it never fully came unsealed. But I cried on that phone call. Couldn't speak for a moment. Just breathed. Because I thought, she's here. Finally, she's actually here. I need you to hold that feeling. Hold it right next to this one." The first withdrawal from my RIF happened 4 days after Elaine's diagnosis. 4 days. Nadia didn't come home because we were drowning. She came home because she had looked at the water and decided to start bailing it out for herself. But I didn't know that yet. What I knew was what I could see. And what I could see was a daughter who showed up, who learned the language of her mother's illness, the way you learn the layout of a house you intend to live in for a long time. She came to every appointment at the memory clinic. She knew the names of the nurses at the Alzheimer's Society outreach office on Cunard Street. She called the pharmacist at the Shoppers on Roby by his first name within a month. She took the insurance calls that used to eat my whole afternoon, and the CRA correspondence that made my eyes blur, and the prescription coordination that required 3 phone calls to accomplish one simple thing. She made my life lighter in a way I hadn't known it could be, and she studied every number she ever touched. Here is how she did it. I want to tell you precisely because someone listening to this needs to recognize the shape of it. Around month 4, Elaine had a bad week. Not just confused, frightened. Calling for her own mother, who had been gone since 1999. Asking me what year it was and then asking again 20 minutes later like the answer had never arrived. I hadn't slept properly in 3 weeks, and one evening, a Thursday, Nadia came to the house with takeout from the Vietnamese place on Gottingen and a folder under her arm. She set the folder on the kitchen table between us, with the careful ease of someone who had rehearsed this moment without making it look rehearsed. "Dad, I need you to really hear me out." She had a way of slowing her sentences down before she said the thing she actually meant, like she was building a runway for the words to land on. "You're 73, Mom is 67. If something happens to you, and I'm not trying to scare you, I just need you to think about this. Everything is in your name, your pension, the RRIF, the house. If you go tomorrow, all of it gets frozen while the estate works through probate. And Mom is sitting here, unable to access a single dollar, during the worst period of her life. That terrifies me. It should terrify you too." Every word of it landed exactly where I was most afraid. Like she'd been sitting in the corner of my bedroom at 3 in the morning reading my private worries right off the ceiling. "These are enduring power of attorney documents," she said. She opened the folder slowly. "Financial and personal care. It just means that if something happens to you, I can step in immediately. Keep the bills paid. Keep Mom in this house. Keep everything running. You're carrying too much, Dad. Let me carry this part. I was running on 4 hours of sleep and fear, and the particular exhaustion that belongs to people who care for someone who is slowly becoming someone else. The kind of tired that doesn't stay in your muscles, it gets into your thinking. Into the part of your mind that is supposed to slow down and read carefully before it trusts a thing. I signed. She had it commissioned the next morning at a notary office on Spring Garden Road. She mentioned it to me later the way you'd mentioned the weather. And God forgive me, I slept that night like a man who had finally set down something he'd been carrying too long. I thought I'd given her a tool to protect her mother with. What I'd given her was access to everything. Run the clock forward. 22 months of 5 a.m. medications, of lying in the dark after Elaine was finally down and doing the arithmetic. Is there enough? Will there be enough? Will I last long enough to make sure there's enough? 22 months of good days when she'd laugh at something from 30 years ago as if it had just happened. And bad days when she'd look at me with a face that recognized nothing about me at all. 22 months of holding myself together because she needed one solid thing to push against, and I had decided that thing would be me. And then a Sunday came that split everything I'd known into before and after. My son-in-law Theo had invited us for dinner. Theo Marchetti, Nadia's husband of 11 years. A quiet man, an actuary at a firm downtown on Barrington Street, who worked with numbers the way other people work with tools, patiently and without drama. And who I had spent the first 5 years of knowing him dramatically underestimating. The kind of man you walk past at a party without a second thought and would desperately need beside you when the ground gave way. It was a Sunday roast. The grandkids, their 2 boys, were noisy in the way children are when they've been told to be careful, and have immediately forgotten it. Elaine was having a good evening, warm and present and laughing at things, wearing the blue cardigan I love on her, and Nadia was across the table from me being exactly who she had always been in public. Warm, generous, laughing at her husband's jokes, making sure everyone's glass was topped up. I was watching my wife's face. I do that. I always do that now. Then Theo's hand found mine under the tablecloth and he pressed his phone into my palm without looking at me. The screen said, "Check your RRIF account right now, then tell them you're feeling chest pain and let me drive you home." I looked up at him. His face was completely still. One slow nod. The kind that means, I need you to trust me right now without asking why. I opened the RBC banking app under the edge of the table. I had not looked at this account in months. Nadia managed the finances. That was the arrangement we'd agreed on. That was the deal I had made in exhaustion and love and naivety on a Thursday evening over takeout food. The balance read $14,840. I sat with that number. I looked at it the way look at you at something that cannot be right and yet is sitting in front of you in plain light. There had been $318,000 in that account. 31 years of careful saving, set aside for one woman and one purpose, and the number on the screen was $14,840. Nadia was laughing at the end of the table. Elaine was smiling along, bless her, with no idea where the conversation had gone 3 minutes ago. The boys were thundering down the hall. The whole house smelled like roast and rosemary. I put my hand to my chest. I don't feel right, I said quietly. I think I need some air. Nadia was out of her chair before I finished. Her concern was real enough to watch, and Elaine reached for my arm. And even in that moment the only thing I felt clearly was that I did not want Elaine frightened. So I kept my voice low and even, and told her I just needed to step out for a minute. Theo walked me to the car. Nadia stood in the doorway and called after us. "Let me know if you need anything, Dad. I'll come by in the morning." I sat in the passenger seat of Theo's Subaru on a quiet Halifax street in November, and the first thought I had, not the second, not after a moment, the first, was not about the money. It was about Elaine, about the home past Bayers Lake, about the afternoon light in that garden, about the number I had built a life around so that she would be safe when I wasn't there to keep her safe myself. And the woman who had taken it was standing in a lit doorway, watching us pull away, with a look on her face like she was doing us a favor by letting us go. Theo didn't drive to a hospital. He drove downtown to his office building on Barrington, up to the 9th floor. The place was empty on a Sunday evening, and our footsteps came back at us off the floors. And I thought, without quite meaning to, that this is what it sounds like when something is about to become permanent. He sat across from me at his desk and he looked at me the way people look at you when they've been carrying something on your behalf for a long time and have finally decided tonight is the night they put it down. "Walter," he said, then caught himself. "Sorry, Gordon. I've been going over this for months and I think I've been rehearsing the wrong version of this conversation." He folded his hands on the desk. "I need you to know that everything I'm about to show you I have verified 4 times. I did not come to you with a suspicion. I came to you with documentation." "How long have you known?" I asked. 5 months. I let that sit. 5 months. I looked at the wall behind his head and I thought about all the Sunday dinners in those 5 months. All the times Nadia had refilled my coffee and asked after Elaine's appointments, and I had felt grateful, had felt lucky, had thought to myself that I had done something right somewhere to deserve a daughter who showed up the way she had. "Why did you wait?" I said. He pressed his lips together. "Because I needed Nadia to be ready, and I needed every single door closed before you ever knew there was a door." Then he opened the folder. He started with the withdrawal history. 19 months of transactions, always between $4,000 and $6,000. Never the same amount twice, never the same interval. Always under the threshold that triggers a mandatory report under the Proceeds of Crime and Terrorist Financing Act. And he showed me the threshold, showed me the ceiling she'd stayed beneath with the precision of someone who had been briefed on exactly where the line was. Nadia had a contact, someone she'd worked with years ago in financial services, and the structured withdrawal pattern suggested she'd been coached on where not to step. "This is called structuring," Theo said. "It's a federal offense under Canadian law, entirely separate from the theft itself." I looked at the rows of numbers laid out on his desk. Neat, documented, dated. My own daughter had robbed me with the patience of a professional. The discipline I had spent her childhood trying to teach her she had finally put to use, just not on anything I recognized. Then came the pension. Nadia had taken the enduring power of attorney I'd signed at the kitchen table on a Thursday night, when I was too wrung out to read it carefully. And she had gone to Service Canada and my pension administrator with perfect paperwork and requested that my monthly CPP and employer pension deposits be rerouted into a secondary account she controlled. The forms were flawless, the signatures were mine. Why would anyone question it? I stared at the wall. Then the account statements. She had changed the mailing address on my RIF to a Canada Post box she'd opened on Roby Street. The paper statements stopped arriving. And because Nadia handled the finances, because that was our arrangement, because I had trusted her the way you trust the foundation of the house you've lived in for 30 years. I had not noticed for over a year that I'd stopped receiving them. Then Elaine's account. Theo slid a single page across the desk, and I knew from the way he held it before letting go that this was the one that would do the most damage. Elaine had kept her own savings account for the length of our marriage. Her quiet money. A credit union account she'd opened herself in 1987 and maintained carefully ever since, the way women of her generation sometimes kept something that was purely theirs in a marriage, where one person handled most of the larger finances. She rarely mentioned it. It was simply hers. Gone. Emptied over 6 transactions across the span of a bad month for Elaine, a month when she had barely known what week it was. Nadia had chosen her window with a surgeon's eye. I put both hands flat on Theo's desk and looked at them. Just my hands. The hands that had wired houses and signed permits and signed off on 31 years of work that held and never failed. The hands that had signed a kitchen table document on a Thursday night because I was too tired to be careful. "There's one more thing," Theo said. He slid the last page across deliberately. "The way you save the heaviest thing for after a man has had a second to brace himself." It was a beneficiary designation change form for my RIF, my signature at the bottom. I remembered signing it without recognizing what I was looking at. A Tuesday morning in month 11. Elaine had been up most of the night. I was running on nothing. And Nadia had arrived with coffee and a small stack of papers and said, "Just some routine account maintenance. Dad, I've taken care of all of it. You just need to sign here." Buried in that stack was a form that had removed my son-in-law Theo and our grandchildren entirely from the RIF beneficiary designation and placed Nadia as sole beneficiary. My own hand, my own pen, erasing the people I had spent 30 years building something for. And then Theo said, "There's something else you need to hear." He told me that for several months, Nadia had been making careful remarks. To her cousins at a family gathering in Dartmouth. To the neighbors on our street. To people from our church. Little things. "Dad's having a hard time. I'm worried about how he's managing on his own. He's not as sharp as he used to be. He'd be the last one to admit it, but I'm the one who's been keeping things running over there." An elder law specialist Theo had quietly consulted had recognized the pattern immediately. Nadia was laying the groundwork for a capacity assessment application. If she could get a physician or a court to determine that I was no longer capable of managing my own affairs, and she had been quietly and patiently building that story in people's minds for months, she would be positioned to become my legal guardian under Nova Scotia's Adult Capacity and Decision-Making Act. And every withdrawal, every rerouted deposit, every quietly altered form, would be folded neatly into legal authority. She wasn't only taking my money. She was building a story in which taking my money was eventually going to be permitted. I sat in that chair and looked at Theo Marchetti, my daughter's quiet husband, the man I had barely noticed at a party 11 years ago. The man who worked with numbers for a living, and had apparently spent 5 months using that skill on my behalf without saying a word to a living soul until he was certain. And something shifted in me that I do not have a clean word for, not rage, not grief, something older and colder than either one. "How did you find it?" I asked. "He was updating some joint financial planning documents for us over the summer," he said. He noticed the RIF balance in a disclosure form that came through as part of a routine insurance review. He pulled the statement history. He saw the pattern. He closed his office door and he did not say a word to anyone, including Nadia, until he had built a case that could not be dismantled. My phone buzzed on the desk. It was Nadia calling to check on me. Theo answered and put it on speaker. Her voice was smooth and warm and exactly what it had always been. She said Elaine was fine, said the boys were in bed, said she'd told them Grandpa wasn't feeling well and they'd prayed for me and gone to sleep. Then she went quiet for a moment. She said, "Elaine asked for you just now, Dad. She wanted to know where you were. I told her you'd stepped out for some air and that you'd be home soon, and she said, okay, he always comes back." None of us spoke. Theo and I just sat with that sentence in the air between us. Elaine, my wife, 67 years old and losing herself slowly to a disease that takes your words and your days and finally your face. She still knew, in whatever was left of the deepest part of her, that I always came back, and her daughter had been emptying out the thing I'd built to make sure she'd be safe when I couldn't anymore. Theo looked at me across the desk. "What do you want to do, Gordon? Here is the thing about sitting in an empty office on a November Sunday night in Halifax at 73 years old with $14,000 to your name and the full weight of the truth pressing down on you. You've got two choices and they both look like roads. You can make noise. You can call her right now. You can say every true and terrible thing that has been piling up in your chest since you looked at that number in the RBC app under the edge of a tablecloth. You can be the fire. Or you can be the thing that actually helps Elaine." I thought about the home past Bayers Lake. I thought about the garden that got afternoon sun. I thought about what the next chapter of her life was supposed to look like. I thought about what it would look like if I let my anger write the next line instead of me. I looked at Theo. "I want every door closed before she knows one is open," I said. "And I want Elaine protected first. Everything else waits its turn." He nodded. He already had a plan. They never tell you what justice actually feels like. You spend your whole life watching it in films and it looks like a speech, like a confrontation, like the look on someone's face finally admitting what they did. You think it will feel like a breath you've been holding finally let go. When it's real, when it's your own daughter, it doesn't feel like winning. It feels like surgery. Necessary, permanent, and completely without satisfaction. Monday morning I was in the office of a lawyer named Patricia Osei at a firm on Queen Street. Theo had called ahead. She went through the documents the way a surgeon goes through a procedure, methodically, without flinching, focused entirely on what needed to come out. By noon, every power of attorney Nadia held, over my finances, over my personal care decisions, had been formally revoked with the Public Trustee's office in Nova Scotia, and with every financial institution she had accessed using those documents. She lost all legal authority over my accounts before she sat down to her lunch. She had no idea. By the following day, the beneficiary designations had been restored. Theo and the grandchildren were back on the RIF. Nadia's name was removed. She still had no idea. By midweek, Patricia had submitted a formal complaint to the Nova Scotia Securities Commission. And Theo's documentation, 5 months of compiled transaction records, signed disclosure forms, communications logs, had been handed to a financial crimes officer at the Halifax Regional Police. The officer called Theo and told him it was the most thorough private citizen file he'd seen in his career. Theo thanked him and hung up the phone. That's who Theo is. Then Nadia came by the house. She brought soup from the deli on Quinpool. She sat with Elaine while her mother watched the evening news. She tidied the kitchen without being asked. She poured me a cup of tea and sat across from me and said, "I've been worried about you since Sunday. The boys were asking about you this morning." I looked at my daughter across my own kitchen table. I thought about $14,840. I thought about Elaine's credit union account, 40 years of quiet savings, emptied in a bad month. I thought about the story Nadia had been telling people, neighbors, cousins, the people at church, about how I was struggling, how she was the one holding things together, how maybe someone should be keeping a closer eye on things. I picked up my tea. "You're right to worry," I said. "I've been thinking the same thing. From here on, I'm going to start paying much closer attention to everything." She nodded and looked pleased. She had no idea what was already in motion all around her. 2 weeks later, I called her on a Saturday morning. "Nadia," I said, "come for dinner on Sunday. Bring Theo, bring the boys. I feel like we should all be together." She came with a bottle of wine and her husband and her 2 sons and her widest smile. The table was set the way Elaine liked it. with the good cloth and the candles she always said were for special occasions, even though I'd stopped waiting for special occasions a long time ago. Elaine was in the blue cardigan. She was having a good evening, present, warm, telling a story from 30 years ago that made everyone at the table laugh, even Nadia, even carrying everything she was carrying. I watched my daughter across the table. She was everything she had always been in public, attentive, laughing, filling the room with ease. The woman who had been quietly pulling the floor out from under me for 19 months, sitting at my table, eating the food I'd cooked, performing her love for an audience that mostly believed it. Theo sat beside her, steady, quiet, invisible to everyone at that table except me. Partway through the meal there was a knock at the front door. I stood up, I walked to my own door, across my own floors, through my own house. I opened it. 2 plainclothes officers from the Halifax Regional Police Financial Crimes Unit. Calm, unhurried, paperwork in order. I had spoken with them 3 days before. They knew exactly where they were and exactly why they'd come. I heard Nadia stop talking behind me. I stepped aside. The officers came in, and I watched my daughter's face in the exact moment she understood. I want to tell you what I saw there, because this is the part that stayed with me long after everything else had settled. There was no shame first. Not even a flicker of it. Her eyes went fast around the room, to me, to Theo, to the door, scanning for the exit that was not there because every exit had been closed, carefully and quietly, over the previous 2 weeks. And then her eyes landed on her husband and she looked at him with something I had never seen on her face before. Pure surprise. She had not believed him capable of it. She had not believed either of us capable of it. Theo stood up slowly. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. He looked at her and then he looked at Elaine and he said quietly, "I need you to look at your mother before you leave." Nadia looked at Elaine. Elaine looked back at her daughter with nothing in her eyes but warmth. She didn't understand what was happening. She thought perhaps Nadia was leaving early, the way she sometimes did after dinner when the boys were tired. She reached out and patted Nadia's hand where it rested on the table. "You don't have to go yet, sweetheart," she said softly. "We haven't had dessert." Nobody moved. Because what Elaine's illness had done in that moment was the cruelest kindness I have ever witnessed. It had kept her completely safe from understanding what her daughter had done to her. The disease that was taking everything else from her had, in this one moment, protected her. Nadia would never have to watch her mother's face change. She would never see understanding arrive in those eyes. Elaine would carry her daughter gently through whatever time was left to her, with Nadia's name still clean and good in whatever part of her remained. Nadia would never earn that mercy, and she would never lose it either. Theo spoke to her one last time before the officers walked her out. His voice was even. He said, "She'll probably keep you safe in her mind until the end. Her illness will do that for you. You'll never have to watch her understand what you took from this family. But I understand it, and your father understands it. And I need you to know that every withdrawal you made while he was up at 5 in the morning giving her medication, every document you slid in front of him, while he was running on 4 hours of sleep trying to keep her alive, every Sunday dinner where you let him tell you he was grateful. I have known about all of it. For 5 months I have known, and I am going to spend the rest of my life making sure both of them are okay. Not because I have to, because that is what it looks like when you actually love someone." They walked my daughter out the front door. Elaine watched her go and waved from her chair with a cheerful little wave. She called out, "Drive safe, love. Come back soon." Nadia pleaded guilty. The case Theo built was precise and complete and left no workable defense. The charges included fraud over $5,000, breach of trust and criminal structuring under the Proceeds of Crime and Terrorist Financing Act. Restitution was ordered. It comes back slowly, in pieces, the way it was taken. Some of it doesn't come back at all. I have made what peace I can with that. Some days that's the only kind of peace available and you take it. But Elaine's care is protected. Patricia Osei found planning structures I hadn't known existed. Instruments under the wills, estates and succession framework that could shelter Elaine's future care, even with the account as damaged as it was. The home past Bayers Lake, the one with the garden that gets afternoon sun, the one I had visited in secret and thought about in the dark for 2 years, is still within reach. Elaine is going to be all right. Not the life we planned. Not the account I spent 31 years filling. But all right. And right now, all right is everything. Here is what I want to leave you with. Because I promised myself I would tell this honestly, and not just in the way that makes me look like I had it figured out from the beginning. I don't think Nadia became this overnight. I think it started as something smaller. A resentment maybe, or a sense of entitlement. A voice in her head that said she was the one who came back. She was the one who was managing everything. She was the one who should be compensated for that somehow. I think the first withdrawal had a story attached to it, and the story made the second one easier. And by the time the numbers were large enough to matter, there was already a whole architecture of justification built around them that she had been living inside of. For so long she'd stopped noticing the walls. That's what frightens me most. Not that she was a monster. That she was a person who reasoned her way there one small comfortable step at a time. The way people do when they stop checking their own thinking against anything outside themselves. So here is the thing I want you to do before you close this and move on with your evening. If there is anyone managing your money, your medication, your paperwork, anyone at all, even the person you would swear on anything you trust most, set up a way to see your own accounts with your own eyes, on your own device, that no one else controls. Not because trust is wrong, because trust and verification were never supposed to be the same thing. If someone you love is living with dementia or any condition that makes them dependent, do not wait until you are too exhausted to read what you sign. I know that exhaustion. I know it from the inside. I know how reasonable it feels to hand something heavy to someone who is offering to carry it. But the signing table is not the place to be tired. It cannot be. And I want you to sit with this question tonight, the one I still sit with. If everything you had quietly built to protect the person who mattered most to you was taken, not by a stranger, not by a system, but by someone whose name you would have said without hesitation if anyone had asked you who you trusted, would you have found the quiet road, or would you have needed to be loud? I'm not certain I found it. I think I just knew that Elaine needed me to look for it. Tell me in the comments where in the world you're listening from, and what time it is where you are. Type a 1 if you think I made the right call going quiet. Type a 2 if you would have confronted her at that table and said everything out loud. Type a 3 if you honestly don't know what you would have done, because that is the most honest answer there is and the one I respect most. And if you've ever had someone use your trust as the instrument of your harm, tell me. You will not be the only one in that comment section. Not anywhere close. If this story reached you in any way, please subscribe and leave a like so that the next person who needs to hear something like this can find their way to it. We tell true family stories here. The hard ones, the ones people don't say at the dinner table. And your being here is the only reason we can keep telling them. I'll see you on the next one. Thank you for staying. This is a fictional story inspired by real emotional experiences and fully reimagined for original content. Any resemblance to actual persons or events is coincidental.